A swift investigation brings charges, serious charges, for a half-dozen Baltimore officers. The death of Freddie Gray ruled a homicide at the hands of police. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Shannon Bream in for Brett Baer. The prosecutor found that 6 officers had a hand in the police custody death of Freddie Gray, who died April 19th, 1 week after suffering a broken neck in the back of a police van. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen with a look at the politics behind a city long plagued with problems and highlighted by this week's protests. But first, correspondent Leland Vittert, who is in Baltimore, with a look at the charges and the reaction on the streets. Good evening, Leland.
Shannon, good evening. All 6 of those officers right now are in custody, but we have learned the one charged with the most serious of crimes has already posted his $350,000 bail and could be at home asleep with his wife tonight. Charges including second-degree homicide came less than 24 hours after police gave Baltimore's state attorney a confidential police report on the death of Freddie Gray, a 25-year-old man who ran from police and ended up dead after a ride to the station house. Marilyn Mosby read the entire charging affidavit against the officers at a press conference. All of the officers involved in Gray's arrest face felony charges, including assault and misconduct in office. The police wagon driver charged with second-degree depraved heart murder and other felonies could face more than 6 decades in prison.
To the youth of this city, I will seek justice on your behalf. This is a moment. This is your moment.
Neither hundreds of police in riot gear nor the National Guard could dampen the celebration on Baltimore streets.
Yeah, it do surprise me because I thought they was going to be let off with no kind of charges. We're going to get peace. We're going to get peace. They're going to settle down now. I know it is.
We are satisfied with today's charges. These charges are an important step in getting justice for Freddie.
The charges gave added energy to pre-planned May Day rallies around the country. In many, Black Lives Matter became an added cause. At the White House, the president reacted within minutes, but with restraint.
It is absolutely vital that the truth comes out on what happened to Mr. Freddie Gray. And it is my practice not to comment on the legal processes involved. That would not be appropriate. But I can tell you that justice needs to be served.
Some argue the charges are politically motivated, and Mosby's cozy relationship with Freddie Gray's family attorney represents a conflict of interest, something she denies. But the Fraternal Order of Police said she should appoint a special independent prosecutor to avoid any appearance of impropriety.
We believe that these officers will be vindicated as they have done nothing wrong.
Legal experts say there's a good reason behind the number of charges against each officer.
I think the prosecutor did this in order to make sure there is some type of conviction. There's no way that these officers would not have ended up being charged with something.
Now, that officer charged with the most serious of crimes faces a May 27th preliminary hearing. It could be months after that before his trial takes place, Shannon, although folks here on the street say if there's an acquittal for any of these officers, the violence we have seen over the past week would pale in comparison to the response to such news. Back to you.
Not something anybody wants to see. All right, Leland, thank you very much. The protests in Baltimore this week shed light on a city that has for years been in turmoil. Baltimore has a rate of violent crime that's nearly 4 times the national average. Nearly 1/4 of the city's residents live in poverty. So have the policies of the past failed the city? Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen tonight with a look at the politics behind Baltimore's plight.
And we shouldn't pretend that it's new.
President Donald Trump, the only elected official looking back riots that rocked Baltimore after the assassination of Martin Luther King to find broad historical trends contributing to the latest incidents of rioting.
What it is young boys, the young folks of this community showing decades old of anger, frustration for a system has failed them. I mean, this is bigger than Freddie Gray. This is about the social economics of poor urban America.
But who actually ran the system that so demonstrably failed Baltimore's young black men? The city's last Republican mayor was Theodore McKeldin, seen with Dr. King in 1966, McKeldin's last year in office. Maryland has had only 2 GOP since then, the second being the incumbent elected 6 months ago. Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings has spent 2 decades representing Baltimore in the House. The city's city council is exclusively Democratic, as are the leaders of its schools and major unions. Not surprisingly, of Baltimore, some see the failed system being one-party rule and liberalism in particular.
The city is on edge tonight. It's 10 p.m. in Baltimore. Isn't Baltimore the epitome of a city that has been run by liberal Democrats for years? Can we make a conclusion that those policies have failed the residents of Baltimore?
Juan Williams, a historian of the civil rights, noted that Baltimore shed 1/3 of its white population starting in 1960, but the community never relinquished basic principles of good governance.
For people who remain, have a right to result half failure in terms of democratic ethics and policies.
Let me tell you that we can go to other cities that are conservative, that have been run by other parties, and I'm going to tell you, you're going to find places where things are bad also.
Nor can scarce funding be entirely to blame for Baltimore's Shannon, 15
about those efforts and how they have or have not been very successful. Thanks, James.
You bet.
Well, German police say they have stopped a possible Boston Marathon-style terror attack. Authorities arrested a couple they say were planning to target a major May Day bicycle race scheduled for today in Frankfurt. The race was canceled as a precaution. Prosecutors say a search of the couple's home turned up an assault weapon, ammunition, and chemicals commonly used in preparing homemade bombs. Vice President Joe Biden is going to bat for the administration's nuclear deal with Iran, even as he admits funding from the West could be adding fuel to the fire. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel has the story tonight from the White House.
There's nothing minimal or predictable about a war with Iran. If required, it will happen.
Tough talk from Vice President Biden, who says military conflict may be the only option if Tehran races toward a nuclear bomb. Biden also noted money the regime gets from an eventual nuclear deal with the West could finance more bad behavior.
Despite good reason to think most of it would go to urgent domestic needs, some or all of it may fund further mischief in the region.
Meanwhile, 4 U.S. flagged ships traveled through the Strait of Hormuz yesterday with U.S. warships accompanying them. That's expected to continue for U.S. and British flagged ships following the Iranian seizing the Maersk Tigris, a Danish-owned ship carrying the flag of the Marshall Islands.
The ship was asked to come to port. It refused, and our naval forces took action to escort it to the port.
House Speaker John Boehner sounded stunned.
Well, this week, the Iranians fired on and seized a neutral vessel traveling in international waters.
Biden says the administration is taking steps.
We are working continually to develop the means and capacity to counter Iran's destabilizing activities, as we've demonstrated in places like the Straits of Hormuz every single day, and we're prepared to use the force.
Despite the regime's bad behavior, the U.S. and its allies continue trying to transform a framework with Iran into a nuclear agreement. The Senate is likely to vote next week on a bipartisan deal that Republican Chairman Corker and Ranking Democrat Ben Cardin. Critical.
We're getting closer to making sure any potential agreement. And Iran, by its words and its actions, is showing exactly why we need this type of accountability.
A number of Republican senators are pushing for votes on amendments they say make the legislation stronger despite a veto threat from the president. Shannon?
Mike Emanuel at the White House. Thank you, Mike. Up next, how Hillary Clinton seems to be turning on her former boss and her husband. But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering. Louisville, where they are getting ready for the 141st Kentucky Derby tomorrow. American Pharoah is the favorite to win the annual Run for the Roses. He'll be ridden by the same jockey who rode California Chrome to victory last year. Fox 11 in Los Angeles with a lawsuit against reality TV star Bruce Jenner. An LA court spokeswoman says Jenner is being sued for wrongful death by relatives of the woman killed in a car crash involving Jenner back in February. So far, no comment from Jenner, who recently went public about his decision to transition into a woman. And this is a live look at Chicago from Fox 32. The big story there tonight is word that President Obama's presidential library will be built in the Windy City. The decision has not yet been publicly announced, but sources say it will be built on Chicago's south side, not far from the Obama family home. That is tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Reports. We'll be right back.